The summer heat had settled thick over Charleston, clinging to everything, seeping through the walls and settling into the bones. I felt it that morning, but it wasn't the heat that weighed me down. It was Elizabeth, my wife of 27 years, standing by the door with her suitcase. She was heading to Atlanta for a conference again. "Chase will be here in a few minutes to pick me up," she said, not meeting my eyes. Chase Andrews was her new colleague, young, smooth, ambitious. He was the type who always had the upper hand, even on things he shouldn't. "It didn't sit right with me. I could have driven you to the airport," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She shook her head. "No need. Chase offered, and he knows the route well. Besides, it's easier this way." "Easier, huh?" I muttered under my breath, but she didn't seem to catch it. Instead, she turned, heading back to the mirror for a final touch of lipstick, a swipe of something pale and neutral that somehow still made her look sharp, almost untouchable. I watched her in the mirror as she finished, her dark blonde hair pinned back just right. Even after all these years, she was striking, with those piercing green eyes and the way she held herself, as if she were in control of every room she entered. But today, she was distant, like I didn't quite fit into the picture she had in her mind. It was then that the familiar knot tightened in my stomach, the one that had become all too common these past few months. Finally, headlights flashed through the window, and a sleek silver car pulled up, Chase in the driver's seat. The sight of him made something flicker inside me, a feeling that was part anger, part helplessness. I forced a smile and walked with her to the door. "Elizabeth, I could have." "Really, Michael, there's no need," she said, flashing that rehearsed smile before heading out without another word. She was halfway down the porch steps when she glanced back, as if remembering something she'd forgotten. "Tell Maggie I'll call her tonight," she said, looking back at me. I nodded. "I will." And just like that, she was gone, the taillights of Chase's car disappearing down our quiet, tree-lined street. I stood there in the silence, feeling the emptiness that now hung in the house. And for the first time, I let myself acknowledge the fear twisting in my gut. This wasn't the first time she'd been distant, wasn't the first time she'd gone on these trips that felt somehow too frequent. But this time, there was something else nagging at me, a whisper, faint but persistent, that told me I had to look closer. I had barely stepped back into the house when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up with a familiar name. Natalie. Natalie was a family friend and, until a few months ago, Chase's girlfriend. She had a way of getting to the truth of things, always did. I picked up the phone, feeling the knot in my stomach tighten. "Hey, Natalie," I answered, trying to keep my voice calm. "Michael," she said, her voice careful, as if she was choosing her words. "Listen, I don't mean to meddle, but I thought you should know something." I didn't respond, letting her continue. "Chase, he's not exactly the faithful type," she said. "When we were together, he had this habit. He's not the kind to let his professional boundaries stop him from getting what he wants." The air around me felt thick. "What are you saying, Natalie?" "I don't know what I'm saying," she replied, sounding uncertain. "But I know that when we were together, I found out Chase was, well, let's just say he had some work relationships that went beyond work. And now he's driving your wife to Atlanta? I'm just worried about what he might have in mind." I let her words sink in, feeling each one weigh down on me. "Thank you, Natalie," I said quietly, my voice almost catching. There was a pause. "Michael, just be careful." As I hung up, my mind raced, every instinct screaming that I needed to do something, anything. I stood there, staring at the empty space where Elizabeth's suitcase had been, and wondered if it was already too late. The house felt emptier after I hung up. Natalie's words bounced around in my head, the warning signs suddenly blaring where I'd tried to ignore them before. Elizabeth and I had gone through hard times. Marriage is never smooth, but this felt different. Colder. Calculated. I grabbed a drink, settled into the worn leather armchair in the den, and scrolled through old photos on my phone. Elizabeth smiling, Maggie in her graduation cap, the four of us at the beach. All the pieces that once made sense together. But now Chase, just the thought of him, was ripping those pieces apart. I downed the last of the drink, and, against all better judgment, I dialed our oldest, Claire. I needed someone else to hear it, to help me keep from spinning out. "Hey, Dad," she said, sounding distracted. "Claire, I need to talk to you." I tried to keep my voice even, but I wasn't sure I succeeded. Her tone changed immediately. "What's wrong?" I didn't want to drag her into this mess, but it was too late. The words came out. "It's your mother. She's with that colleague of hers, Chase. And I think there's something I need to be worried about." There was silence on the line, the kind that prickles your skin. "You think she's—" Claire's voice trailed off, but I knew she understood. "I don't know," I replied. "I don't know anything anymore. Dad, I'm coming over. I think we need to talk this through. I'll be there in 20 minutes." That was long enough to go down 1,000 different rabbit holes in my mind. The past years played back in flashes. Little things I'd dismissed. Elizabeth's new wardrobe, her late nights at the office, the way she'd brushed off our arguments, always finding some way to shift the blame. When Claire arrived, she didn't say much at first. She just sat down across from me, her eyes scanning mine, picking up on the tension I couldn't mask. "Tell me everything," she finally said, voice low. So I did. Everything. Right from Natalie's call to the feeling that had been gnawing at me for months. By the time I finished, Claire looked like she'd aged a decade in 20 minutes. "Have you talked to her?" she asked. What would I even say? I replied, feeling the helplessness wash over me again. "Then we get evidence," she said, a steely look in her eye that reminded me of Elizabeth. But unlike her mother, Claire's eyes held nothing but loyalty. "What do you mean?" She leaned forward, voice low. "Natalie has connections. Maybe there's a way to find out what's really going on. And if there's nothing, at least you'll know." It felt drastic, extreme even, but with every passing second, the doubt gnawed deeper, and I knew I couldn't live with it gnawing forever. "All right," I said, swallowing the knot in my throat. "Let's find out the truth." The next morning, my mind was set. Claire and I met Natalie at a small coffee shop just outside the city limits, far from familiar eyes. She looked nervous, glancing around as if Chase might walk in at any moment. "Thanks for meeting us," I said as we sat down. The seriousness in Claire's face made her look older, wiser, something I wish she hadn't needed to be so soon. Natalie gave a small nod. "Of course. I wouldn't be here if I didn't think you deserved to know the truth." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I have a friend who works security at the Hyatt in Atlanta. Chase, he has a track record there, if you know what I mean. And last week, she told me that he booked a suite with a single bed. I can find out if it's been occupied by more than one guest." I felt a lump form in my throat. Claire's hand found my arm, a subtle gesture, but one that grounded me, even as everything in my mind was spinning. "What will it cost?" I asked, not sure what else to say. "Nothing," Natalie replied firmly. "It's on me. I just need you to know that Chase is a serial boundary crosser. I thought I was special. I wasn't. And I don't think Elizabeth will be either." She tapped quickly on her phone, then looked up at me. "I'll have an answer by tonight. I can text you when I know." "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice rough. I felt the weight of her words, each one cutting like glass. The rest of the day crawled by. Every second felt stretched, suspended in tension. Claire stayed with me, making small talk, pulling up family photos, trying to keep me anchored. But the ticking clock only made it worse. Finally, just after 7, my phone buzzed with a text. "Natalie." The message was brief. "They're sharing the suite. Do you want the room number?" The answer punched the breath out of me. Claire must have read my expression because her face softened. "Dad," she whispered, her voice full of something I couldn't place. Pity, maybe, or sorrow. I read the message again, the words blurring on the screen. Everything felt cold and far away, and yet one thought pushed its way to the surface. I needed to confront her. And I needed to do it before she could get her story straight. "Claire, I need to call her," I said, the decision forming solid in my mind. Without hesitation, Claire nodded, ready to support whatever came next. I dialed Elizabeth's number and held the phone to my ear, each ring echoing in the silence of the room. After the third ring, she answered, her voice light, as if she hadn't a care in the world. "Hey, Michael," she said, sounding almost too cheerful. "How's everything?" "Elizabeth," I replied, feeling the tension in my voice. "I know." A beat of silence. Then, she tried to laugh it off. "Know what? I know about the suite. About you and Chase," I said, my words sharper than I intended. "Don't even think about denying it. There was a pause, and in that silence, I heard the truth loud and clear. Michael, she started, but whatever excuse she had faded in her mouth. Her voice turned defensive. I thought you'd understand. It's not what you think. Then explain it. I cut in. Explain to me why you're sharing a room with him. Sneaking off for business, trips that you never mentioned until last minute. She hesitated, then sighed, her voice dropping to a whisper. Look, Michael, this isn't the time or place. We'll talk when I get back. I could feel the finality in her tone. She wasn't going to answer me, not over the phone, not here. But she had already said enough. I hung up without another word, letting the silence stretch. Dad, Claire said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. She didn't even try to deny it. I murmured, staring at my phone screen as though it held some answer. Not once. Claire didn't speak. She didn't have to. I knew the truth now, and there was no escaping it. After the call, I sat in silence, feeling like a hollow shell of myself. Claire stayed close, her presence grounding me. We didn't need words. The truth was already out, plain and unchangeable. The house was still, too quiet, so I broke the silence. Claire, I began, my voice rough. I forgave her once. It was years ago, before you were born. I paused, searching her face for a reaction. She looked up, her face a mix of surprise and understanding. What happened? She asked softly. I swallowed, feeling the weight of the story I hadn't told in so long. It was someone close, a friend. We just had a rough patch. She crossed the line, but she swore it was a mistake, a one-time thing. Said it was the pressure, the stress. So, I buried it. For the family. But now, my voice trailed off, choked by the bitterness of having been deceived again. Claire placed her hand on mine. Dad, you don't have to carry this alone anymore. Not this time. I nodded, grateful for her strength, and took a deep breath. Natalie said something that stuck with me. She said Elizabeth wouldn't be special to Chase. That he has a pattern with women. I'm not sure if she even realizes what she's getting into. That's her choice now, Claire replied firmly. She's the one who made this decision. That night, I slept fitfully, haunted by dreams of Elizabeth's face. That slight smirk I had come to mistrust, the cold gleam in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. The memories played back like a broken record until I finally got out of bed, surrendering to the reality that sleep wouldn't come. The next morning, I called my brother-in-law, Raymond. He was Elizabeth's brother, but he'd been more like a brother to me too. He knew what had happened all those years ago, and if anyone could help me keep a clear head, it was him. He picked up on the first ring, his voice groggy but familiar. Michael? Everything all right? No, Ray, I said, feeling the ache of honesty settle in. Not this time. I think I'm done. There was a heavy silence before he responded. I had a feeling, ever since she got that promotion, something's been off. We decided to meet at our old family home, a small, faded farmhouse just outside Charleston. The place was our little sanctuary, untouched by city life, where we could be ourselves. When I pulled up, Raymond was already waiting on the porch, leaning against one of the weathered posts. He looked up as I stepped out of the car, his face hard but sympathetic. As I approached, he motioned for me to sit, and we settled into the creaky wooden chairs on the porch. I thought you should know, he began, his voice low. It wasn't just that first time. I didn't tell you before, but Elizabeth had other close calls. Flirtations, maybe more. She kept it under wraps, but I always wondered. My throat tightened. It felt like everything I had overlooked, every doubt I'd pushed down, had been screaming the truth at me all along. You think she? He nodded slowly, his gaze steady. I don't know for sure, but I think you know deep down that she never stopped needing that kind of thrill. I let the words sink in, feeling as if a dam had finally burst. All the years I'd stayed for the family, for the kids, flashed through my mind. Years that now felt wasted on someone who'd never truly valued the life we'd built. What are you going to do now? Raymond asked, breaking the silence. I looked out over the fields, my resolve hardening. It's time for me to leave. I'm going to talk to a lawyer. Raymond nodded, his eyes full of sympathy. Then don't wait. Do what you need to do. As we sat there, the weight of the decision settled on me. But in that quiet moment, for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I called the lawyer the next morning, a woman named Anna Lopez who specialized in cases just like mine. I kept the meeting brief, laying out everything I'd learned about Elizabeth's affair with Chase. Anna didn't ask unnecessary questions. We'll keep this straightforward. File for divorce, lay claim to your share, and protect what's yours. It was all business, exactly what I needed. She laid out the next steps, and I left her office with a clear plan and a feeling I hadn't had in months: control. That evening, I texted Natalie a simple thank you for her help. She responded, suggesting we meet, saying she had more to share. We agreed to meet at a bar near the outskirts of Charleston, somewhere we wouldn't be recognized. When I arrived, Natalie was already seated, a drink in hand, looking as tired as I felt. She handed me an envelope as I sat down. "What's this?" I asked, flipping it open. "Statements," she said, "from 3 women Chase has targeted at work. They're willing to come forward if needed." I looked at her, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Why?" "Because he doesn't get to keep getting away with it," she said simply. The weight of her words hit me. For the first time, I saw a path forward, not just to end things with Elizabeth, but to hold Chase accountable for his part in all of it. We talked briefly before parting ways, her quiet resolve echoing in my mind as I left. I got home late, and Claire was waiting up. I showed her the envelope, her face set with determination as she read the statements. "It's time, Dad," she said, her voice firm. "We're done looking the other way." For once, I agreed completely. The following week moved fast. Anna filed the divorce papers, and they were served to Elizabeth while she was still in Atlanta. I didn't expect a call from her, but it came almost immediately. The minute I answered, her voice snapped through the line, dripping with anger. "Michael, what the hell is this?" she demanded. "Divorce papers? Are you serious?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "I know about you and Chase. And I know this isn't the first time." Silence. Then a bitter laugh. "You're throwing everything away over a work trip?" "No, Elizabeth," I replied, my voice steady. "You threw it away." There was nothing more to say, so I hung up. I knew she'd return soon enough to make her case in person. But for now, the silence felt like freedom. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and preparations. Anna reached out to Chase's employer, armed with Natalie's envelope and the statements. The pressure was building on him from all sides, and I knew it wouldn't be long before the walls started closing in on him too. On the day Elizabeth finally returned, she found the house emptied of most of my things. Claire and Maggie were at my side, and we'd moved into a small rental nearby. It was far from what we were used to, but the air felt lighter, the tension finally lifting as we settled in. Late one night, there was a knock at the door. It was Elizabeth, looking defeated, her gaze bouncing between me and the girls. "Michael," she started, voice trembling. "Please, let's talk." But it was Maggie who spoke first, her voice cold and steady. "We've done enough talking, Mom. We know everything. And we're staying with Dad." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears, but I had nothing left to offer her. The girls turned their backs, and I closed the door quietly behind her. The silence that followed was the most peaceful I'd felt in years. With Elizabeth out of the picture, the house quickly felt like ours again, new, small, but full of possibility. Days passed in quiet routines as we found a rhythm, but tension simmered beneath the surface. I knew Chase was still lurking, unchecked, and unfinished business had a way of coming back. Then one afternoon, Natalie called, her tone sharp. "Michael, Chase was fired today. The firm got hold of the statements, and he's been scrambling." "I thought you want to know." Relief washed over me, but Natalie's next words pulled me back to reality. "But be careful. He's blaming you for this." I thanked her, though her warning lingered long after I hung up. That night, as I locked up the house, headlights flared in the driveway. For a moment, fear gripped me, but it wasn't Chase. It was Raymond, stepping out of his truck, a knowing look in his eyes. He motioned to the porch, where we both settled in silence. Finally, he spoke. "I heard about Chase," he said, his voice low. "Elizabeth's furious. Says you're ruining her life. But Michael, you did what you had to." I nodded, feeling the truth in his words. "I had to end it. For me, for the kids." Raymond looked me square in the eye, his voice resolute. "Then don't look back. Chase, Elizabeth, they're not worth another thought." In the days that followed, I held on to Raymond's words, finding strength in their simplicity. And as weeks turned into months, the distance grew, with Claire and Maggie at my side. The shadows that had once haunted us lifted bit by bit. Then, one quiet morning, a final text arrived from Elizabeth. Short, simple, and to the point. I hope you find what you're looking for. I looked around at the life I was building, at my kids, at the peace filling the house. And I knew that, at last, I already had. Months passed, and the old wounds started to close. Chase was gone, Elizabeth had kept her distance, and I finally began to feel settled. But life, in all its unpredictability, had one last surprise. One Saturday, Claire convinced me to take a break and head into town. "You need a change of scenery, Dad," she insisted. We stopped by a quiet cafe, and as we entered, I spotted Natalie across the room, sitting alone with a coffee, looking tired but relaxed. Claire nudged me. "Go talk to her. I'll grab us a table." I walked over, and when Natalie looked up, a flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed by a small, warm smile. "Michael," she greeted, gesturing to the seat across from her. We spoke easily, our conversation flowing like two old friends picking up where they left off. She shared that she was finally free from Chase's shadow, relieved to have her life back. I told her about the new routines with my daughters, the small victories in building a new home. As we talked, something settled between us, a quiet understanding born from shared experiences and a mutual respect. When I finally rose to leave, Natalie reached out a gentle touch on my arm. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, for listening, for being there. You helped me more than you know." I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. "Same goes for you, Natalie. More than you know." In the weeks that followed, we met up a few more times. There was no rush, no expectations, just a natural ease that felt like healing. And as spring turned to summer, what began as shared support became something else entirely, something that felt, finally, like hope. The quiet companionship with Natalie grew, naturally, without the weight of past betrayals. We took things slowly, with simple walks around Charleston's old streets and conversations over coffee. There was no rush, just an understanding that we were both rebuilding, steady and honest. One evening, after dinner, she mentioned her daughter, Amelia. "She's 8, she said, her face lighting up. "She's been my rock, even without knowing it." Hearing her speak about her daughter, I felt a pull, a curiosity to meet this part of her life. Maybe someday I could meet her? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Natalie smiled. "I'd like that." 2 weeks later, I finally met Amelia. She was a bright-eyed, shy girl with a ready smile, and I was struck by how familiar it all felt. The easy conversations, the simple warmth. Soon after, Natalie and I decided to bring Amelia and Maggie together, sharing a quiet family dinner by the water. That night, as we watched the girls laugh, it felt right. Like a fresh start, a new chapter. A few months later, I realized just how far I'd come when I asked Natalie to stay for dinner. A small but significant step. And as we sat around the table, sharing laughter and stories, I finally understood how much I'd gained by letting go of the past. The shadows of Charleston were gone, replaced by the gentle, unwavering light of a family I'd found anew. It had been a year since Elizabeth left for Atlanta, since the night everything changed. 12 months of moving through the fog, finding a new path, and settling into a different life. Each month chipped away at the weight of betrayal until only the essentials remained. Me, my kids, and in the end, Natalie. In that year, our family reshaped itself quietly. Claire had settled into her own apartment nearby, but Maggie chose to stay, her presence grounding me as much as I did her. Natalie and I continued our steady rhythm, neither pushing nor pulling, just being. It wasn't until the anniversary of the divorce that I realized how far I'd come. Natalie and I took a walk by the waterfront, the same walk I'd taken dozens of times before, but this time my steps felt lighter, filled with something that felt like peace. When Amelia ran up, showing me a drawing she'd made, I felt something click. A promise, maybe, that I was ready to embrace this new life fully. "How about we make it official?" I asked Natalie that evening, a hint of a smile in my voice. Her answer was a soft, happy laugh, the kind that told me I'd finally found a way out of the shadows.